Story number 1.
It was a night that seemed normal at first. Just another routine late shift at the hospital, followed by the long drive home. I always preferred the night drives. The roads were emptier, the air cooler, and it gave me time to decompress after dealing with the chaos of the ER. But on that particular night, something changed. Something I couldn't explain, and even now, years later, still haunts me. I had just finished my 12-hour shift around midnight. The hospital was quiet, save for the occasional distant beeping of machines and the soft murmur of voices down the hall. I grabbed my jacket, slipped into my car, and started the drive back to my small apartment on the outskirts of town. The usual route would take me along the highway and then a few miles of country roads through some sparsely populated farmland. About 20 minutes into the drive, the road narrowed and the bright glow of the city lights faded behind me. The stretch I was on was known locally as Hollow Creek Road, a narrow, two-lane road lined with towering trees that almost touched above the roadway, forming a dark tunnel. The moon was hidden behind clouds, and my headlights carved only small pools of light ahead. I turned up the radio to keep myself awake, but the signal kept breaking up. Static. Hissing. Then a faint whisper, barely audible beneath the noise. I adjusted the dial, thinking it was just interference, but then I caught a single word, clear as day: help. I frowned. I paused the radio, rolled the window down slightly, and listened. The night was still except for the occasional rustling of leaves in the cold wind, no one else on the road, no cars behind or ahead. I chalked it up to my imagination and kept driving, trying to shake off the feeling that I wasn't alone. As I rounded a bend, my headlights illuminated the silhouette of a woman standing at the edge of the road. She wore a long, tattered white dress that hung loosely, stained and faded as if it had weathered years of rain and sun. Her hair was dark, matted, and clung to her pale skin. She was barefoot, toes gripping the cracked asphalt. I slowed, heart beating faster. It was late, no one should be out here. I figured she might need help. I reached for the window switch, about to offer her a ride or call for help. But then, as I got closer, she lifted her head and I saw her face. It was a face I would never forget. The hollow, sunken eyes that held an unbearable sadness, the pale lips quivering as if she were on the verge of sobbing. Her skin was unnaturally cold, and there was a strange mist swirling around her feet. I slammed on the brakes, tires screeching against the road. She didn't move, didn't blink. "Are you okay?" I shouted, voice cracking. She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. Instead, I heard the whisper again, this time much louder, echoing in my mind. "Help me." A shiver ran down my spine. The fog that had been creeping in thickened, swirling around the car in ghostly tendrils. Suddenly, my radio burst to life with static, and then a chorus of distant voices chanting, almost inaudible but growing louder. I hit the gas, flooring the accelerator. The woman remained frozen in place as I sped past, her face still etched into my memory. The fog seemed to cling to the car as I raced down the road, and my headlights flickered. The radio crashed again, this time emitting a sharp, piercing tone that made my ears ring. I glanced in the rearview mirror and caught a glimpse of something. Her, floating behind the car, a pale figure drifting over the road with no feet touching the ground. I blinked and she was gone. My hands gripped the wheel tightly as the road ahead stretched on endlessly. Then, up ahead, I saw headlights. A truck, slowly approaching from the opposite direction. It was the only vehicle I'd seen all night. Relief washed over me, thinking I was finally near the end of this nightmare. But as the truck passed, the driver looked at me and smiled. Not a friendly smile, more like a knowing, twisted grin. His eyes were dark hollows, like empty sockets. His skin was stretched tight over his face, pale and almost translucent. I slammed on my brakes, but the truck vanished into the fog. My heart pounded so hard I thought it might burst. I turned off onto a side road, desperate to get away. That's when I saw the old wooden sign hanging crookedly by the roadside. Gravesend Cemetery, established 1892. I hadn't noticed it before, and yet somehow I was on that road now. The road was lined with crumbling tombstones, gnarled trees casting eerie shadows under my headlights. The fog thickened, swirling through the graves like restless spirits. As I drove slowly past, the radio flickered back on. I tried to turn it off, but the static gave way to soft weeping. Then, unmistakably, a voice, "Please, don't leave me here." I swallowed hard and glanced into the side mirror. The woman was standing at the edge of the cemetery road, motionless, staring at me. Her face was twisted in anguish. I floored the gas and raced out of the cemetery back onto the main road. The radio went dead. The fog lifted. I pulled into a gas station, shaking. The attendant looked at me strangely as I fumbled to pay, my hands trembling. I asked about the cemetery, about the woman on Hollow Creek Road. The attendant's face went pale. "You mean Anna?" "Yeah, she died out there about 10 years ago. Hit by a drunk driver late at night on Hollow Creek. They found her dress snagged on a branch near the cemetery, but her body was never recovered." He lowered his voice. "People say she still walks the road, looking for help. Some say she tries to warn drivers away, but others say she's desperate to be found. Either way, no one who stops for her makes it back." I laughed nervously, but the fear in my chest was real. That night, I didn't sleep. I kept hearing footsteps outside my window, soft sobbing carried by the wind. I've never driven Hollow Creek Road again. Sometimes when I'm alone at night, I swear I can still hear her whisper my name on the wind. Story the end.
Story number 2.
The night was cold and unusually still as I got into my car just after 11 p.m. The sky was clear, but a thick fog had begun to roll in along the stretch of highway I was about to drive. It was a familiar route, just over 50 miles of rural backroads between my small town and the city where I worked. I'd done this drive hundreds of times, mostly late at night or early morning shifts, so I didn't expect anything out of the ordinary. I plugged in my phone to the charger and set my playlist to something soothing. The car lights sliced through the fog, illuminating the white lines on the cracked asphalt, and the only other source of light was the occasional glow from distant farmhouses. As the fog thickened, visibility dropped to barely a few dozen feet. About 20 minutes into the drive, I passed a lonely intersection with an old church on the corner. Its steeple was silhouetted against the moon, but the building looked abandoned, windows boarded up, the front door hanging slightly open. I'd always felt a little uneasy passing that spot at night, though I'd never had a reason to be truly scared. As I drove past, I caught a flicker of movement near the doorway. A woman, young, wearing a long white dress, stood just inside the shadows, motionless, staring directly at me. I blinked, but when I looked again, she was gone. My heart kicked up a notch. I told myself it was just a trick of the light, my mind filling in shapes out of the fog. I pressed on, trying to ignore the feeling that someone or something was watching me. The fog thickened even more as I continued, so much so that my headlights barely penetrated the dense gray. My wipers slapped against the windshield rhythmically, but there was no rain. It was just heavy moisture hanging in the air. At some point, the car's radio began to sputter and crackle, the music fading into static. I twisted the dial, but every station was gone, replaced by white noise and faint whispers I couldn't make out. I reached over and turned it off. Then I noticed the fuel gauge. It was dropping fast, too fast. I had filled up an hour ago, but now the needle was almost on empty. I pulled over at a small rest stop, a clearing surrounded by towering trees. I stepped out into the mist, the air thick and cold, my breath forming small clouds. As I walked to the gas pump, I saw a figure near the tree line. A man, I thought at first, dressed in old-fashioned clothes. He was staring at me, but didn't move. I called out, but he didn't respond. I took a step forward, and he vanished into the fog. Chills ran down my spine. I got back into the car and locked the doors. As I started the engine, the headlights flickered and dimmed. The radio crackled back to life on its own, emitting a soft lullaby, barely audible but unmistakably haunting. The air inside the car turned icy cold. I could see my breath again. Suddenly, the passenger seatbelt snapped into place with a sharp click. I didn't want to look, but I forced myself. The seatbelt was fastened, though no one was there. I fumbled for the door lock and tried to open it, but it was stuck. Then the lullaby turned into a whispering voice. Words I couldn't understand, but they sounded desperate and pleading. The air grew colder still. My hands shook as I reached over to unbuckle the seatbelt, but it wouldn't release. The whispering turned to a scream that pierced the silence, then abruptly stopped. The radio shut off, the temperature in the car returned to normal, and the seatbelt unclicked. I slammed the door open and sped off, my heart pounding. For the next few miles, I drove with my eyes darting between the mirrors and the dark trees lining the road, half expecting to see that woman in white, or the man again. The fog slowly lifted as dawn approached, and the road brightened. I stopped at the next gas station and asked about the church on the highway. The attendant's face went pale when I described it. "That place has been abandoned for decades," he said quietly. "They say a woman died there a long time ago. Some people claim to see her wandering at night. The man, he was the preacher, disappeared under strange circumstances." I drove the rest of the way home, never feeling quite safe on that stretch of highway again. Sometimes when I'm alone at night and my car radio sputters or the air turns cold, I think about that drive, and I wonder if those figures are still out there, waiting for the next traveler. Story, the end.
Story number 3.
The night was heavy, thick with the kind of darkness that swallowed the edges of the road whole. It was late autumn, a chill in the air that made the breath visible, swirling in the dim glow of my headlights as I drove alone down the winding stretch of highway. I had been on the road for hours, the long trip home after visiting my aunt who had fallen ill. The highway was a narrow 2-lane ribbon slicing through dense forest, with no towns or gas stations for miles. The quiet hum of the engine was the only sound inside the car, aside from the occasional rustle of dry leaves skittering across the asphalt. My eyes flicked constantly to the rearview mirror, half expecting to see a tailgater or some truck that had missed the exit. But the road behind me was empty. There's a stretch of this road, about 15 miles long, where the trees crowd so close on either side it's like driving through a tunnel. The moon was almost full, but the canopy above blocked most of its light. My headlights cast long, distorted shadows across the asphalt. The trees seemed to lean in, watching. I passed a small turnout, a gravel shoulder lined with old rusted guardrails, and something caught my eye. There was a figure standing just beyond the edge of the shoulder, near the tree line. At first, I thought it was a person hitchhiking, but as I drew closer, the way the figure stood didn't feel quite right. She was a woman, pale, wearing what looked like a white dress that hung limp and dirty, like it had been dragged through mud. Her hair was dark, long and tangled, falling over her face in a way that hid her features. She stood perfectly still, shoulders slack, arms hanging loosely by her sides, almost as if she were a doll left there. I slowed down instinctively, heart thudding in my chest. I glanced in the side mirror, then at her again. She didn't move, didn't acknowledge me as I passed, but I could feel her eyes, even though I couldn't see her face. The instant I was level with her, the hairs on the back of my neck prickled. I didn't look away. I couldn't. Then, without warning, she vanished. I slammed on the brakes, heart pounding, and pulled over onto the shoulder. The engine rattled in protest. I grabbed my phone, but no signal. The figure was gone. I got out, the cold biting through my jacket as I scanned the edge of the forest. Nothing. No footprints, no sign that anyone had been standing there. Shaking, I climbed back in, locked the doors, and continued on. The rest of the drive felt wrong, as though the darkness itself was pressing against the windows, trying to seep in. At one point, I heard a soft tapping sound coming from the back seat. I whipped around, but no one was there. My heart felt like it would burst. The radio flickered and sputtered, catching an old, staticky country tune that I hadn't heard in years, the kind of song about lost love and loneliness. The volume surged and then fell silent. I tried to focus on the road, but my mind kept drifting back to the woman. Who was she? Why was she standing out there? And why did it feel like she wanted me to stop? A few miles later, I passed a dilapidated old church, the kind you see in movies, white paint peeling, a crooked steeple. I caught a glimpse of something standing in front of it, the same woman. She was looking directly at me now. I blinked, and she was gone again. My pulse was racing. I pulled over again, hands shaking as I tried to calm down. The phone buzzed suddenly, a text message. I stared at the screen. It was blank. Then a whisper, barely audible, as if it were right next to my ear. "Help me!" The whisper came from inside the car. I jumped, dropping the phone on the floor. Scrambling to pick it up, I saw nothing on the screen. No new messages. I turned on the interior lights and scanned the car. Empty. I drove faster now, gripping the wheel so tightly my knuckles went white. Then the car sputtered, the engine stalled. I coasted to a stop on the side of the road. The silence was absolute except for my ragged breathing. Then I heard it again. Soft footsteps, slow, deliberate, coming closer. I fumbled for the door handle, heart pounding as I threw the door open and stepped out into the cold night air. There was no one there. Only the forest, the rustle of leaves, the crunch of gravel underfoot. I didn't look back. I ran back to the driver's seat, started the engine. It roared to life and I peeled out, not daring to look in the mirrors. But as I drove away, I felt something brush against my shoulder. The fabric of the white dress, cold, wet like river water. The car windows fogged instantly, and on the rear windshield, written from the outside in, was a message. Don't leave me. I didn't stop until the sun was starting to rise. Days later, I learned that a woman matching the description had died on that stretch of road over a decade ago. Her car had spun out during a storm and crashed into the trees. She was never found until weeks later downstream in a river, still wearing the same white dress. The locals say she still waits for someone to help her, wandering the night roads, searching. I never drive that way after dark. But sometimes, when the wind is just right, I swear I hear tapping on my window. Story the end.
Story number 4.
It was just past midnight when I decided to take the long way home. I had been visiting a friend who lived about 2 hours out of town, and the night had slipped away faster than I expected. The highways were quiet, the occasional truck rumbling past, headlights cutting through the dark like knives through fog. My car's dashboard clock blinked 12:17 a.m. The air was crisp and smelled faintly of wet earth and fallen leaves, typical for early November. The route I chose was a back road, one that wound through dense forests and rolling hills. I liked it because it was scenic, a little lonely, and the perfect place to clear my mind after a stressful week. This night, though, something felt off. I couldn't shake the unease crawling up my spine, that subtle tension like something was watching just beyond the edge of the headlights. The first time I saw her was about 20 miles into the drive. I was rounding a bend when I spotted her standing on the side of the road, a woman in a long white dress, soaked and dirtied as if she had been wandering in the woods for hours. Her hair hung wet and tangled around her face, obscuring her features, but her posture was so still it made me freeze. I slowed down instinctively, gripping the steering wheel tighter. She didn't move, didn't wave or signal for help, just stood there, looking, somewhere between me and beyond. I remember thinking, is she okay? Should I stop? But the place was so isolated, no cell service for miles, and the kind of place you hear stories about disappearing people or late-night hitchhiker myths. I swallowed hard and kept going, eyes flicking nervously to the passenger side where she might have gotten in. A minute later, I glanced in the rearview mirror, expecting to see her running after the car or maybe waving, but she was nowhere. It was as if she'd vanished into thin air. My breath hitched. The road ahead dipped down into a valley shrouded in mist. The trees leaned in closer, branches scraping faintly against the roof of my car. My headlights barely penetrated the gloom, and my heart pounded harder in the silence. That's when the radio sputtered and crackled, shifting from static to an old-timey tune, a slow, mournful country song with lyrics about lost love and cold nights. I didn't recognize the station, and the voice sounded distant, like it was coming from an old gramophone. The volume crept up and down, and I struggled to turn it off, but the dial wouldn't budge. The car was filled with the scratchy song, filling the space around me with a sense of loneliness that wasn't mine. I tried to focus on the road, but my eyes darted to the side mirrors and the rearview mirror. Nothing. Just blackness and shadows. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw headlights. A car was behind me, approaching fast. I didn't recognize the model at first. It was an old sedan, maybe from the 1960s or 70s, all black and glossy despite the grime covering the road. The headlights were bright but dull at the same time, like they'd seen better days. It matched my speed exactly, never getting too close but never falling back. My fingers tightened around the wheel. I thought about speeding up, but my foot felt heavy. The engine's hum lowered, as if the car was struggling to go faster. The radio shifted suddenly, switching channels by itself, until I landed on a voice speaking in a low, gravelly tone. I couldn't make out the words, just the feeling. Warnings, maybe. Or stories, something old and forgotten. Then I heard it. Tapping. Soft, rhythmic tapping coming from the back seat. I twisted in my seat to look, heart hammering. The back seat was empty. "Who's there?" I whispered, but my voice sounded lost inside the car. The tapping stopped. I told myself it was nothing, maybe a branch tapping against the window, maybe my nerves playing tricks. But then the rearview mirror caught something. Movement. Just a flicker. A shadow. Something pale. The old sedan was now closer, and in the passenger window, I thought I saw a woman's face. Pale, ghostly, framed by dark, wet hair. Her eyes seemed empty, dark hollows that stared without blinking. I slammed on the brakes and pulled onto the gravel shoulder, heart racing so hard I was sure it would burst out of my chest. The sedan slowed and pulled up alongside me. Its headlights dimmed, and for a moment I could see inside. The driver's seat was empty. The passenger seat, too. The windows were fogged up, except for a single handprint smeared on the passenger side window, as if someone had been pressing against the glass from the inside. Then, a cold wind rushed past the car and the sedan vanished. I sat frozen for a moment, then turned the ignition. The engine caught, and I sped away, adrenaline flooding every nerve. For the next hour, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being followed. The trees seemed to close in tighter, shadows reaching like fingers. Every time I glanced behind me, I half expected to see that black sedan. Eventually, I reached the highway again, and the forest gave way to open fields. The radio snapped back to normal, and the eerie presence seemed to lift. When I finally pulled into my driveway just before dawn, I was shaking. Over the next few days, I searched online for any accidents or stories connected to that road. What I found was chilling. A young woman named Claire had died there 30 years ago. Her car had spun out during a heavy rainstorm on the same winding stretch. She'd been wearing a white dress that night, coming home from a dance. Her body was found days later, deep in the woods beside the road. Her death was ruled an accident, but locals whispered about something more sinister, about how she still walked those roads, waiting for a ride home that never came. After that night, I never took that back road again. But sometimes when I'm driving late, alone, I swear I see her standing on the side of the road, waiting. And sometimes the radio flickers to that old country song. Story the end.
Story number 5.
It was a typical late spring night when I decided to take the long way home from my friend's place. The clock had just passed midnight, and the roads were deserted, save for the occasional car whose headlights would flash briefly in my rearview mirror before disappearing down the highway. I was driving an old sedan with the windows down, letting the cool night air wash over me, trying to shake the lingering exhaustion from a long week at work. The route I took was familiar. Highway 89 out of town, then a left turn onto County Road 14, which wound through dense woods and rolling farmland. I liked that stretch because it was peaceful, quiet, and the night sky seemed to open up above me. It was one of the few places left where the stars felt endless, unpolluted by the harsh city lights. As I cruised along, the only sound was the hum of the engine and the occasional rustle of wind through the trees. The road was slick from a light rain earlier that evening, and the reflection of my headlights shimmered off the wet asphalt. I glanced down at the dashboard clock, 12:15 a.m., and felt a small thrill. There was something about the dead of night that made everything feel a little more alive, a little more unpredictable. About 10 miles in, I passed an old abandoned gas station. I remember thinking about how long it had been closed, probably decades. The peeling paint and rusted pumps gave it the look of a relic left behind by time. As I passed, I caught movement in the corner of my eye, something white near the edge of the woods. I squinted, but it was gone before I could get a better look. I shook my head. Probably just a trick of the light. The road curved sharply ahead and narrowed. Trees arched over the pavement like cathedral columns, their branches interlocking to create a canopy that swallowed the moonlight. The road signs warned of a sharp turn in the next half mile, but I was driving cautiously anyway. The wet road made the bends more treacherous, and the forest felt unnervingly silent. Then, just as I rounded the bend, I saw her. She was standing in the middle of the road, a figure dressed in a long white gown that fluttered in the slight breeze. Her hair hung down in dark, tangled strands, partially obscuring her face. I slammed on the brakes, tires squealing, coming to a stop only a few feet from where she stood. My heart hammered in my chest. For a moment, I could only stare, breath fogging in the cold night air. She didn't move, didn't blink. She just stood there, staring at me with eyes that seemed impossibly deep and empty, the kind of eyes that look right through you. I rolled down the window, voice shaky. "Are you okay? Do you need help?" She tilted her head slowly, then raised a pale hand to point behind me. I glanced back, confused. The road was empty, nothing but trees and darkness. When I looked back to her, she was gone. I blinked hard, rubbing my eyes. The road was empty now, the eerie silence pressing in. A cold sweat broke out on my neck. I didn't want to believe what I was feeling, the instinct to speed away, to get as far from this place as possible. But curiosity rooted me there for a few more seconds. Then my headlights caught something else. A small, crumpled piece of paper lying where she had been standing. I reached out, grabbed it, and unfolded it carefully. Written in faded ink was a date, June 12th, 1978. Underneath was a name, barely legible. Evelyn Harper. A shiver ran down my spine. I put the paper on the passenger seat and started the engine. I didn't look back as I sped away. That night, I couldn't shake the image of her eyes. I knew the name sounded familiar, but I couldn't place it. The next day, I did some digging online. The name Evelyn Harper popped up in a small archived newspaper article about a tragic car accident on County Road 14, a young woman killed when she was hit by a car while walking home late at night. The date matched exactly, June 12, 1978. People said she was trying to get home after a party wearing a white dress and that her ghost had been seen ever since, standing on that very stretch of road. I told myself it was just a local legend. But the paper in my car, that was real. Weeks went by and I tried to forget the whole thing. But every so often, especially on rainy nights, I found myself driving that road again, compelled to see if she would appear once more. One night about a month later, I was driving home late, the roads slick with fresh rain. The fog had rolled in thick, swallowing everything beyond the edges of my headlights. I kept my speed low and my eyes peeled. Then I saw her. This time, she stood at the edge of the woods, not in the middle of the road. Her white dress was soaked and clung to her like a second skin. She looked directly at me, expressionless, as the fog curled around her like smoke. I stopped the car and rolled down the window again, my voice barely a whisper. "Do you need a ride?" She didn't answer. Slowly, she lifted a hand and pointed ahead, toward the deeper forest. I hesitated. Something told me not to follow, but the strange pull of the night was stronger than reason. I put the car in gear and followed where she pointed. The road faded into gravel and then dirt. Trees pressed in tighter, branches scraping the roof. The fog thickened. Suddenly, my headlights caught a figure moving across the road. Two figures, actually, a man and a woman, holding hands. They wore clothes from decades ago, faded and torn, faces pale and gaunt. They didn't notice me. They walked silently into the woods and vanished. My breath hitched. The car stalled. The radio crackled and then went dead. The dashboard clock blinked erratically. I tried to start the engine, but it refused. Then, through the fog, I heard it. The faint sound of laughter, high and eerie, like children playing in the distance. I sat frozen, clutching the steering wheel, heart pounding. After what felt like an eternity, the engine roared back to life. I didn't hesitate this time. I slammed the car into reverse and floored the gas pedal, desperate to escape the encroaching shadows. When I finally reached the paved road, the fog lifted slightly, and the laughter faded into silence. I pulled over and looked back at the forest. The trees seemed to shift, their branches like twisted hands reaching for me. I never drove down that road again. But sometimes, late at night, when the wind is just right and the fog rolls in, I swear I see a white figure standing in the distance, waiting for a ride home. Story the end.
Story number 6.
Driving alone at night has always been a routine part of my life. I worked late shifts at a small-town pharmacy in rural Virginia, and the road home was a narrow, twisting two-lane highway that cut through dense woods and open fields for miles. I was used to the quiet and solitude. I liked it, even. But one particular night changed everything for me. It was late November, a chilly night just before the first real snowfall. The sky was clouded over, the moon hidden behind thick gray layers. My shift had ended around midnight, and the parking lot was empty when I got to my car. I was tired, my eyes heavy from the fluorescent lights and constant phone ringing all evening. As I pulled out of the lot, the familiar hum of the engine and the soft glow of my headlights on the wet pavement comforted me. The road was slick from a light drizzle that had just stopped. For the first 20 minutes, everything was normal. The radio was playing a soft country station, and I sang quietly to myself. I always kept the volume low so I could hear any strange noises outside the car. The highway twisted through the forest, the shadows of the trees leaning in like silent watchers. I glanced in the rearview mirror, just to check, and saw nothing but the empty road behind me. About 15 miles into my drive, near a stretch known locally as Dead Man's Curve, my headlights illuminated something on the side of the road. I slowed down to get a better look, a figure standing near the tree line. It was a man, or at least he looked like one, wearing a long coat and a hat pulled low over his face. I didn't recognize him, and what struck me was how still he was, standing there with his arms hanging loosely by his sides, staring toward the road. I thought maybe he was a hitchhiker, though it was rare to see anyone here at that hour. I rolled down my window and called out, "Hey, are you okay? Do you need help?" But there was no response. The man didn't move, didn't blink. His face was pale, almost grayish in the faint glow of my headlights, and I noticed a strange wetness on the ground near his feet, like puddles reflecting the street lamp light. Uneasy, I eased the car forward slowly. As I passed him, I noticed something strange. His shadow didn't fall on the road or the trees behind him. It simply wasn't there. I blinked, startled, and when I looked again, he was gone. No footsteps leading into the woods, no signs of movement. I swallowed hard and tried to shake off the chill that had crept down my spine. Maybe I was just tired and imagining things. I turned the radio up to distract myself and kept driving. Minutes later, a sharp bend in the road came into view, the one locals warned about because of frequent accidents. As I rounded it cautiously, my headlights caught sight of another figure, this time a woman standing in the middle of the road. She was wearing a long, white dress, soaked and clinging to her as if she'd been in the rain for hours. Her hair was dripping wet and hung in strands over her face. I slammed on the brakes, coming to a screeching halt just a few feet from her. She didn't move or speak. I rolled down the window, my voice trembling as I asked, "Are you all right? Do you need help?" No response. She just stood there, staring straight at me with eyes so dark and empty I felt my stomach twist. I wanted to get out and help her, but something inside me screamed not to. The air around the car felt icy cold, despite the heater running full blast, and my breath fogged the inside of the windshield. Suddenly, the woman's face shifted. Her eyes went completely black, and her mouth stretched into a silent scream. I slammed the window back up, locked the doors, and fumbled with the ignition. The engine wouldn't start. I twisted the key again and again, panic growing. The temperature in the car dropped further, and the radio crackled with static, breaking into unintelligible whispers that sounded like a chorus of voices just out of reach. I looked back toward the woman. She had moved closer, now right beside the driver's side door, her face inches from the glass, her empty eyes fixed on me. I shut my eyes tightly and tried again. Finally, the engine roared to life. I hit the gas, speeding down the road and not daring to look back. After what felt like forever, I reached a brightly lit gas station on the edge of town. I pulled in and sat there, shaking, the hairs on my arms standing on end. The attendant gave me a strange look when I asked if anyone had reported seeing a woman in white or a man by the road. He shook his head but then lowered his voice. "You're lucky to be here," he said. That part of the highway, people say it's haunted. Folks who disappeared, strange sightings, and accidents that never get explained. I stayed at the gas station for an hour, gathering my courage before finally heading home by a different route. The next day, I looked up local history online. I found an old newspaper article about a tragic accident that had happened at Deadman's Curve nearly 50 years ago. A young bride was killed in a car crash there on her wedding night after getting caught in a storm. Her body was found days later in the woods, wearing the same white dress the witnesses said the woman was wearing on the road. There was also mention of a man who used to hitchhike along that stretch, who vanished without a trace in the 1960s. Some said his spirit lingered, waiting for a ride that never came. Since then, I never take that road alone at night anymore. But sometimes when the wind is just right and the night is heavy, I swear I can hear faint whispers on the wind or see a figure standing silently on the shoulder. And I'm always grateful to have a locked door and a running engine. Story the end.
Story number 7.
The night was unusually still when I started my drive home. It was around 11:30 p.m., the kind of late autumn night where the chill in the air settles deep into your bones. I'd been working late at the hospital, the kind of shift that leaves you drained but oddly alert. A cocktail of exhaustion and adrenaline. The town I lived in was small, sleepy, surrounded by thick forests and winding country roads that I'd driven 1,000 times. The highway I was taking, Route 42, cut through miles of woods and farmland, and by this hour, it was usually deserted. I liked the solitude. The quiet gave me time to think, and on nights like this, that was welcome. The only light came from my headlights, cutting through the inky blackness and the faint glow of the dashboard. The radio was off. I preferred silence. About 20 minutes into the drive, the road curved sharply by a stretch known locally as Widow's Bend, infamous for accidents and local ghost stories. I'd always laughed those off as old legends, but tonight something felt off. I saw it first out of the corner of my eye, a figure standing at the edge of the road near the tree line. I slowed down, squinting. It looked like a man, standing still, hands in his pockets, head bowed. His clothes looked old-fashioned, a dark coat and a fedora pulled low over his face. The kind of clothes you might see in a photo from the 1940s or 50s. I blinked and the man seemed to vanish. My breath caught, and I told myself it was just my imagination. Maybe the shadows playing tricks on me. The road ahead narrowed, twisting through the dense trees. The air felt heavier, colder. I rolled down the window, letting the chill in. Suddenly I heard a faint tapping sound on the roof of the car. I froze, heart hammering. Tap! 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 I glanced up but saw nothing except the dark, wet leaves overhead. My skin prickled. I rolled the window back up and locked the doors. The tapping stopped. Trying to shake off the unease, I turned the heater up and kept driving. The radio suddenly buzzed to life with static. Then, very faint, I thought I heard a voice whisper, "Help me." I flicked the radio off, but the feeling that I wasn't alone only deepened. A mile later, I saw her. She stood in the middle of the road, barely illuminated by my headlights. A woman in a long white dress, soaked and dirty, hair plastered to her face. She looked lost, confused, her eyes pleading. I slammed on the brakes, the tires squealing on the wet asphalt. The car shuddered to a stop just feet from her. I rolled down the window, voice shaking. "Are you okay? Do you need help?" She didn't answer, just stared. I wanted to get out to help, but something made me hesitate. The air inside the car grew icy cold. My breath fogged the glass. Her face twisted suddenly, eyes black and hollow, mouth opening in a silent scream. I slammed the window back up and locked the doors. The engine sputtered and died. Panic surged. I tried the key again and again, but the car wouldn't start. The temperature dropped further, frost forming on the edges of the windshield. The radio crackled again, the whispers turning into a chorus of desperate voices. I was trapped. The woman's shadowy figure pressed against the glass, her empty eyes burning into mine. I shut my eyes, trembling, willing the engine to turn over. After what felt like an eternity, the car roared back to life. I floored the accelerator and sped away, not daring to look back. I didn't stop until I reached the town's gas station, brightly lit and buzzing with late-night patrons. The warmth inside felt like a balm to my frozen skin. I told the attendant about the figure on the road. He nodded solemnly. "You saw the white bride. She's been haunting that stretch for decades. Died in a crash on her wedding night. Folks say she still wanders the road, searching for her lost groom." I never took that route at night again. Sometimes when the wind whistles just right through the trees, I swear I hear her whispered cries on the breeze. Story the end.
Story number 8.
It was a chilly autumn night, the kind where the air feels crisp and the stars hang cold and sharp in the sky. I had just finished a late shift at a local diner in a small rural town, and the streets were empty, save for the occasional passing car. My car's headlights cut through the darkness as I began the usual 45-minute drive home. The route took me down a stretch of highway that skirted dense woods and open fields, a quiet stretch known to locals as Willow Creek Road. I'd driven this road dozens of times, always feeling comforted by its familiarity. But that night, something about it was different. Maybe it was the early frost coating the edges of the trees, or the way the moon hid behind fast-moving clouds, or maybe it was just the creeping, hollow silence that had settled in. About 20 minutes into the drive, my car radio, which had been playing soft rock, suddenly went static. I twisted the dial in frustration, but the signal was gone. Then faintly, through the static, I heard a voice. A woman's voice, fragile and desperate. "Help me," it whispered. My heart skipped a beat. I pulled the volume knob up, straining to hear more, but the radio buzzed and cracked again, and the voice was gone. I glanced into the rearview mirror, half expecting to see another car or someone walking along the side of the road, but the highway was deserted. Shaking off the chill that was crawling up my spine, I pressed on. The road twisted through thick forest now, the trees crowding close on either side, their bare branches like skeletal fingers reaching out. My headlights barely penetrated the darkness beyond the road's edge. Then, just ahead, I saw her. A woman stood on the shoulder, dressed in a long white dress that billowed lightly in the night breeze. Her hair hung wet and tangled around her pale face, obscuring it, but I could tell she was looking right at me. I slowed the car instinctively, heart pounding. No one should be out here, especially not on a cold November night. I rolled down the window. "Are you all right?" I called. She didn't move. No answer. Just stood there, still as a statue. I felt a deep unease settle in. There was something wrong about her, something that made my skin crawl. I hesitated, debating whether to stop, but my instincts screamed at me not to. I glanced down at the gear shift, then back at her. Suddenly, a cold wind swept through the car and the temperature dropped sharply. I could see my breath inside the cab. That's when she spoke, her voice trembling and barely audible over the wind. "Please, help me." It wasn't a request. It was a plea soaked in sorrow and fear. I fumbled with the door handle, but found it frozen shut, the metal icy cold. Panic crept in. The woman stepped closer to the edge of the road, and as my headlights caught her face, I saw it clearly. Her eyes, wide and glassy, empty, as if they stared beyond this world. Then, as suddenly as she appeared, she vanished. My heart hammered so loud I thought she'd hear it. I jerked the steering wheel, veering slightly off the road and almost hitting a tree. I slammed my hands on the wheel, trying to steady my breathing. The radio sputtered again, the static filling the car, but now the voice was clearer, echoing in the silence. "Help me, please." I tried to drive forward, but the headlights flickered and dimmed, leaving me in near darkness. The dashboard lights blinked erratically. The engine coughed, but kept running. Then, in the faint glow of the dashboard, I noticed something on the passenger seat. A small, old-fashioned locket, silver, tarnished with age. I hadn't put it there. I reached out, my fingers trembling, and opened it. Inside was a tiny black and white photo of a young woman. Her eyes were hauntingly familiar, like the woman on the roadside. A sudden chill crawled up my spine. I looked around, but the car was empty except for me. The radio burst into static, then silence. The locket was still cold in my hand. My mind reeled. I pulled over onto a dirt path beside the road to gather my thoughts. That's when I saw it, an old broken-down sign covered in peeling paint. It read, "Willow Creek Cemetery." Curiosity and fear warred inside me. I had never noticed the cemetery before. It lay just beyond the edge of the woods. Against my better judgment, I got out of the car and walked toward it, the crunch of dead leaves beneath my boots the only sound. The cemetery was small, overgrown with weeds, and the tombstones were cracked and worn. The moon broke through the clouds, casting silvery light on the graves. I spotted a fresh mound of earth near the center, surrounded by faded flowers. A small plaque read, "Anna Gray, 1983 to 2005. The name hit me like a punch. Anna Gray. The same name I saw inscribed inside the locket. A cold breeze swept through the graveyard, and I heard it again, the whispering voice. "Help me," I turned sharply, but no one was there. My flashlight flickered and died, leaving me fumbling in the darkness. I heard footsteps, soft, uneven, like someone dragging a foot. Then a sob, heart-wrenching and raw. I spun around, and there she was, the woman in white. Her eyes were fixed on me, pleading. "I'm lost," she said, voice barely above a whisper. "They never found me." I wanted to run, but my feet felt glued to the ground. Her image shimmered, flickering like a reflection on water. Suddenly, the earth beneath the fresh grave shifted slightly, as if something beneath was moving. I stumbled backward, heart racing. The woman reached out her hand to me, and I saw beneath her white dress the skeletal remains of a foot, rotting and bare. Fear exploded in me. I dashed back to my car, fumbling with the keys, and slammed the door shut just as the temperature dropped further. The engine roared to life, and I sped away, the shape of the woman fading into the fog behind me. Over the next few days, I couldn't get the image out of my mind. I researched the cemetery and the tragic story of Anna Gray, a teenage girl who had vanished in the woods one night, never found. The locals whispered that her spirit haunted the road, searching for help to cross over. I never took that road again after that night. Sometimes, when the wind is right, I still hear her voice in the static of my radio, or see the flicker of white dress in the corner of my eye. Some nights, when I'm alone on the highway, I swear I can feel her presence, watching, waiting. And I know one thing for sure, some spirits don't rest, and some roads aren't meant to be traveled alone. Story the end.
Story number 9.
The road stretched out in front of me, a ribbon of asphalt cutting through dense forest under the vast emptiness of the night sky. I had driven this route countless times before, Route 47, a long, winding highway between my small hometown and the city. Usually it was quiet but uneventful, but that night was different. I could feel it the moment I pulled onto the road, that strange heaviness that settled deep in your bones, the kind that warns you something's not quite right. I was alone in the car, a tired freelance photographer heading back from a late assignment. The clock on the dashboard read 11:43 p.m. as I started the drive. The air was cool, the wind brushing softly past the cracked window. The radio played softly, classic rock, my usual companion on long drives. But after a few minutes, the music started to distort, crackling and warping until it faded into static. I turned the dial to change the station, but all I got was more static. The radio suddenly went dead. I sighed and switched it off. It was no big deal. The signal was weak out here. What unsettled me more was the darkness that seemed to press close on all sides. The towering pines and oaks loomed like silent sentinels, their branches swaying gently but casting long, twisting shadows. My headlights cut through the darkness, but the fog rolling in thickened the air ahead, blurring the road lines. I tried to focus on driving, but couldn't shake the feeling of eyes watching me. I glanced in the rearview mirror and caught a glimpse of a car tailing me at a distance. It was an older sedan, headlights dim, but steady. I wasn't worried at first. The road was long and mostly empty at night, and it was common to see other cars going my way, but the car didn't pass me. Instead, it kept pace exactly, never closing the distance or falling back. I tapped the brakes lightly to slow down, hoping it would overtake me, but it stayed right behind. The air in the car grew cold, and I wrapped my hands tighter around the steering wheel. Something was off. I sped up, driving faster than I normally would on these winding roads, but the car matched my speed. Then suddenly the headlights vanished. I blinked and checked my mirrors, but there was nothing behind me now, not a single car. I let out a shaky breath, telling myself it must have been a hallucination or my tired eyes playing tricks. The radio crackled back to life, this time emitting a faint, sorrowful melody, an old lullaby that sent chills down my spine. I reached to turn it off, but the knob wouldn't budge. The music grew louder, filling the car with a haunting sound that felt too real to be just static. A cold draft swept through the cabin. I shivered, glancing at the passenger seat. The seatbelt light flickered on and the belt clicked, as if someone invisible had fastened it. I forced myself to look over. No one was there. The empty seat was bathed in a pale glow from the dashboard lights, but the temperature around it was freezing. My heart hammered as the lullaby twisted into a whisper, barely audible but unmistakable. I leaned closer to the radio, trying to catch the words. They were pleading, desperate, "Help me! Don't leave me!" I slammed the radio off, and the car was silent once again, except for the steady hum of the engine and my ragged breathing. The temperature slowly climbed back to normal. I told myself I was imagining things. Stress, exhaustion. I had a long drive ahead and needed to focus. About 15 miles later, I came to a narrow bridge crossing a small creek. The moonlight glinted off the water below. As I approached, I saw a figure standing in the middle of the bridge. A woman, soaked and pale in a tattered white dress. Her hair was long and dark, hanging wet and stringy over her face. I hit the brakes and slowed down. She didn't move, just stared at me with empty eyes. I rolled down the window a little and called out, "Are you okay? Do you need help?" Her head slowly lifted and her eyes met mine. There was a flicker of sadness and fear in them. Then, without a sound, she stepped aside, vanishing into the fog at the edge of the bridge. I sat frozen for a moment, unsure if I'd really seen her or if my mind was playing tricks. I checked the rearview mirror again. No car behind, no one on the bridge, just the mist swirling around the trees. I decided to keep going. The car's engine suddenly sputtered and died. The dashboard went dark, the headlights faded to a dim glow. Panic welled up inside me. I tried the ignition again, but it wouldn't start. I was stranded, alone on a bridge in the middle of nowhere. I grabbed my phone. No signal. I was cut off from the world. I sat there heart pounding, listening to the creak of the trees and the distant rush of water. Suddenly, the passenger door slowly creaked open. A cold wind blew through the car, making the interior shiver. I forced myself to look. The seat was empty, but the scent of wet earth and something faintly floral filled the air. The door slammed shut on its own. I looked down at the seatbelt again. It was still fastened, tight as if someone invisible was sitting there. I tried to unbuckle it, but it wouldn't budge. My phone screen flickered, and suddenly a message appeared. "Don't leave me." I dropped the phone in shock. A low moan echoed from outside, rising to a desperate wail that shook the car. I scrambled out of the driver's seat and bolted toward the edge of the bridge, eyes straining through the fog. The woman appeared again at the far end, her dress fluttering in the wind, face pale and mournful. She raised a hand, beckoning. I took a step back, heart pounding. Then the ground beneath the bridge creaked and shifted. A chill ran through me as I noticed a faded plaque on the bridge railing. "In memory of Anna Marlowe, 1923 to 1947. I swallowed hard. I'd heard rumors about Anna, a young woman who drowned in the creek below the bridge decades ago. Some said she walked the bridge at night, waiting for someone to help her cross over. I ran back to my car and tried the ignition again. The engine roared to life. I didn't look back as I sped off the bridge, the haunting lullaby faintly echoing in my ears. When I finally reached the city, dawn was breaking. I told a friend about the night's events. She listened quietly before nodding. "That road has a history," she said. "People who've driven it late at night sometimes say they see her, the woman in white. They say if you stop, she might get in and you're never the same after. I've never gone that way after dark again, but sometimes when I'm alone and the night is still, I swear I can hear that lullaby, feel the chill of cold breath on my neck, and see the glow of pale eyes in the shadows." Story the end.
Story number 10.
The night had settled in thick and heavy over the stretch of highway I was traveling, the kind of darkness that swallowed every inch beyond the dim glow of my headlights. It was well past midnight when I started my drive home, leaving a friend's small-town gathering several miles out of the city. The air was cool and crisp, the kind that carries a faint scent of pine and damp earth, though the roads were dry. My old sedan hummed along the narrow two-lane highway that snaked through dense forest and forgotten farmland, the only company the steady rhythm of tires on asphalt and the occasional distant hoot of an owl. This stretch of road was one I knew well, had driven it dozens of times before, especially late at night after work or social visits. It was a shortcut through a rural patch, cutting maybe 15 minutes off the usual trip. But tonight, something felt different, though I couldn't quite place it. Around 12:40 a.m., just as I was settling into the monotony of the drive, I passed a weathered road sign I'd never noticed before. Hollow Creek Cemetery, 1 mile. It stood crooked, its letters faded and chipped, half swallowed by overgrown weeds. I found that odd because I was fairly certain there wasn't a cemetery anywhere near this road, at least none marked on any map I'd checked. I slowed down, peering into the dark shoulder of the road. The headlights barely pierced beyond a few feet into the woods on either side. A soft mist had started to gather low to the ground, curling through the grass like thin tendrils of smoke. I shook my head and shrugged off the oddity. Probably just some prankster or old signage left behind from decades ago. I kept driving. A few minutes later, the road curved sharply to the right, winding into a stretch lined thickly with towering pines and oaks. The trees arched overhead, forming a tunnel of shadows. My headlights illuminated the wet asphalt in a dull, yellowish cone, but beyond that, the night was impenetrable. Suddenly in the distance, I spotted a figure standing at the side of the road, barely visible through the mist. A woman, dressed in a long white dress that shimmered slightly in the headlights. Her dark hair hung loose, falling past her shoulders, obscuring her face. I instinctively slowed down, heart rate picking up. I wasn't sure why, but the sight sent a shiver down my spine. I rolled down the window slightly, the crisp night air rushing in. "Hey, are you okay? Do you need help?" I called out softly, my voice catching in my throat. She didn't move. She just stood there, motionless, staring straight at me. I blinked, and when I looked again, she was gone. My breath caught. The space where she had stood was empty, just the fog swirling gently over the grass. I pulled over carefully, eyes scanning the trees and roadside. There was no sign of her. The engine purred softly, and the only sound was the faint rustling of leaves stirred by a gentle breeze. I sat there for a moment, the silence pressing in. I shook my head, telling myself it was just a trick of the light, or maybe someone playing a prank. But the cold feeling that settled in my chest said otherwise. I got back on the road, driving cautiously, eyes darting to the roadside every so often. Around 12:55, the car radio, which had been silent, suddenly crackled with static. Then, through the hiss, I heard a faint voice. "Help me." It was barely more than a whisper, but unmistakable. I reached over, fiddling with the dial, but the voice remained, repeating in a haunting loop. "Help me." My skin prickled. I flipped through stations, but the static and that voice clung stubbornly to the radio. A pang of panic gripped me. I pressed the gas pedal a bit harder, eager to get out of that stretch. Suddenly, the headlights illuminated the figure again, this time standing directly in the middle of the road, not by the side. She was soaked now, her dress clinging to her like wet silk. Her face was turned toward me, eyes wide and glassy, reflecting the light in an unearthly way. I slammed on the brakes, skidding to a stop mere feet from where she stood. My heart hammered so loudly I thought it might burst. I tried to speak, but my voice caught in my throat. She raised a trembling hand and pointed behind me. Instinctively, I looked back. There was nothing but the dark road stretching into the woods. I glanced back at her, but she was gone again. Suddenly, the engine sputtered and died. The dashboard lights flickered and went dark. I twisted the key, but nothing. The radio burst back to life with a burst of static and the chilling whisper, "Help me." The door handle rattled. I whipped my head to the passenger side. The door slowly creaked open. I held my breath and gripped the steering wheel tightly. Then, from the corner of my eye, I saw her, pale, drenched, eyes empty, sitting quietly in the passenger seat. My skin crawled. I slammed the door shut and locked it. The radio went dead again. For several long seconds, I sat frozen. Finally, the engine turned over, and I tore away down the road as fast as I dared. I didn't stop until the mist cleared and I reached the city limits. Later, I learned about a woman named Sarah Mitchell who had died decades earlier, hit by a car while walking home late at night on this very road. They said she'd worn a white dress coming back from a church event, and that her spirit was sometimes seen wandering, still seeking help. I kept the crumpled note I found on my passenger seat, a scrap of fabric stuck to it, and a faded date, June 12th, 1979. After that night, I never took that route again. But sometimes, when I drive alone late at night and the radio flickers with static, I swear I hear a whisper, barely audible through the noise. Help me. Story, the end.
Story number 11.
The night air was sharp and cold as I pulled out of the parking lot after my late shift. It was nearly midnight in late October, and the sky was heavy with clouds that hid the moon, leaving the highway cloaked in darkness except for my headlights cutting through the black. The road ahead, a long stretch of two-lane asphalt, was familiar. I'd driven it countless times on nights just like this one. It ran through miles of dense forest, with only occasional clearings where small farmhouses nestled. I was tired but eager to get home. The silence around me was complete, save for the hum of the engine and the rhythmic swish of the windshield wipers brushing away the light drizzle that had started as I left work. The radio was off. I preferred to drive without distractions, to just be alone with my thoughts and the night. About 15 miles from town, the road curved sharply near a small clearing. I noticed movement along the tree line, something that didn't belong. I slowed my car, my headlights picking out the figure of a man standing by the roadside. He wore an old-fashioned coat, buttoned up to his neck, and a fedora hat pulled low, obscuring his face. His posture was stiff, hands in his pockets, head tilted down slightly. Despite the chill in the air, I could see faint steam rising from his body. I instinctively reached for the passenger door lock, pressing it just in case. Part of me wanted to stop and ask if he needed help, but something in the way he stood felt unnatural, as if he was waiting for something, or someone, but not expecting me. As I approached, the figure didn't move or even look up. I called out softly, "Are you okay? Do you need a ride?" No answer. My car rolled slowly past him, and when I glanced in the side mirror moments later, he had vanished. No footsteps, no disturbance of the fallen leaves, nothing. I shook my head and told myself it was just fatigue and the tricks of the night. I continued down the road, though the hairs on the back of my neck were prickling. My breath fogged the windows as the temperature inside the car dropped suddenly. I adjusted the heater, but it barely seemed to help. Further along, the road narrowed, flanked by towering pines. My headlights suddenly picked up a second figure standing directly in the middle of the road. A woman this time, wearing a flowing white dress that seemed wet and clung to her. Her long hair was dark and tangled, falling over her face. I slammed on the brakes, the tires skidding slightly on the wet asphalt. The woman didn't move or blink. She just stared at me with eyes so dark and empty that I felt the breath catch in my throat. "Are you all right?" I asked, my voice shaking. "Do you need help?" She didn't answer. Instead, her mouth opened wide in a silent scream, the soundless scream that sent shivers down my spine. Suddenly, the car's engine sputtered and died, the dashboard lights flickering out. The temperature plummeted again, and my breath hung heavy in the air. My hands trembled as I tried the key repeatedly, but the ignition stayed dead. From the darkness, I heard a faint whisper, almost like a chorus of voices, indistinct but full of sorrow and desperation. The radio crackled, and the whispers grew louder for a moment before fading into static. I locked the doors and stared through the windshield. The woman was gone. Just as suddenly as it had failed, the engine roared back to life. I hit the gas hard and sped away, my heart pounding, as the woods seemed to close in around the road. When I finally reached the next town, I pulled into a brightly lit 24-hour diner and sat there for an hour, trying to calm down and make sense of what I had just experienced. Later, when I told friends and looked up local history, I learned that the stretch of highway I'd driven was known for tragic accidents decades ago, including a bride who died in a car crash on her wedding night, and a man who vanished without explanation while hitchhiking. Since that night, I've avoided driving alone on that road after dark, but sometimes when the wind rustles just right, I swear I can hear faint whispers and see shadowy figures standing silently at the roadside. Story the end.